Welcome and thank you for coming to our session today on Black homophobia and the way that it influences our possibility of Black liberation. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for coming and thank you for your support. So we're just going to jump right into it with origins of homophobia in the Black community, like where did it started, where did masculinity and the way that we understand it get its roots from. So getting started with Black masculinity, it started off with newly freed Black folks, specifically Black men. After slavery was abolished, or what we consider slavery to be abolished and was really more reimagined, but newly freed Black men saw equality in a white society, and the way to do that was by practicing conventional masculinity, because masculinity is power. What that looks like taking care of the family, being a man and providing for your family and having money and success. Those are white conceptions and Western conceptions of success and masculinity, and that was sought after because that was how newly freed Black men were going to be seen as equals in the society that wasn't made for them, right? So they had to adopt those conceptions of what masculinity looked like in order to achieve that really basic respect and decency. And that also meant, on a more definition scale, subordination of anything that did not serve patriarchy, which is male dominance or men having power in a society, which is, so I'm going to be using the word patriarchy moving forward. That is what that means. I have definitions for some of the terms that I'm going to be using on the website, on the document that this discussion session is based off of. Queer people were included in this. So anything or anyone that did not serve male dominance, masculinity, patriarchy was to be submissive to men, because again, newly freed Black men were trying to make a way in a society, in this new society that had newfound freedom, but women, queer people, children even did not serve that purpose, did not embody what was considered masculinity. And so what is that? What is masculinity? It was defined by sexual activity, and still is. How many women could you sleep with? How many kids did you have, right? That kind of spoke to your sexual activity with your wife if a man was married. Power and money. Like I said, those are very Western conceptions of what success is. So if you had power, often it was considered land, or money. That was success. That made you a man. Being a provider, being able to take care of your family, because again, women, children, they were weaker. They needed to be taken care of. So being a provider for your family was what defined masculinity, as well as competition and competing for resources. Who's the best? Who could always be the best? Trying to be better, and just that exertion of confidence is what defined a man, and these conventional ideas of masculinity that we still find today. This manifested, and a symptom of this masculinity became homophobia, Black homophobia. So, and I'm specifying Black homophobia because culturally the homophobia that our community experiences and pushes forward is rooted in the same thing as like general homophobia, but it has different effects and different implications for Black folks. So it is a symptom of hypermasculinity, the masculinity that I just described in the previous slide, and perpetuated by patriarchy. Again, anything that does not serve the conventional man's man masculinity does not serve patriarchy, and therefore should be submissive and subordinate to that power structure and to men who exhibit. So as a result of that is queer people. Masculinity was defined by proximity to femininity. How close were you to being a woman? As terrible as that is, that's what masculinity looked like. So things that that your traditional man's men did not do, one of those things was sexual activity. How many women do you sleep with? How many women do you have sexual relations with? If you're a gay man, that's zero. And so that already removes you as the idea of what a man is, what a man looks like, what a man should be. And so subordinate to a cishet, again, cishet means someone who is cis, it is short for cisgendered heterosexual. So cisgendered is someone who whose like gender identity aligns with the sex they were born with at birth. So if you're born as a male, then you identify as a man. You are throughout your life, you are a cisgendered person. Same thing with sex being female, identifying as a woman. Heterosexual, someone who's attracted to the opposite sex. So cis het, cisgendered, heterosexual, put together like a compound word. If you are not that, if you are not a cis het man, that you do not fit into the conceptions of masculinity, right? And so homophobia is a symptom of that, and it is perpetuated by masculinity. And it overlooks the interconnectedness of struggle between all Black folk and against white supremacy. You know, we're all fighting the same battle against white supremacy. You know, when I say white supremacy, I mean it in the way I understand white supremacy. It is not just in the literal word. I think a lot of the times when we hear white supremacy, we think of it as like the literal supremacy of white people, and that is the outcome usually of the white supremacist systems. But white supremacy is also the advancement of those cultural, societal, sociological norms. So in conceptions of things like gender, sexuality, roles, who should be doing what, those are all rooted in white supremacist Western ideals. And so Black homophobia overlooks how we are all struggling against those same things. White supremacy doesn't just affect us from a racial standpoint. It also is the oppression of people's sexuality and gender. That is because going back to the original slide, as Black people were being newly freed, they were seeking acceptance in this new society, and a part of that new society was the subordination of queer people and the subordination of women. And so our community mimicked and adopted those beliefs, and therefore perpetuated it in our own communities. And so the black homophobia is an adoption of those beliefs, of those white supremacist beliefs that forced our people who are newly freed to assimilate into their culture that excluded people and oppressed people out, not just because of their race, right? And so by rejecting those beliefs, you are also rejecting white supremacy and the power that it has over us and has over our community in ways that we often don't think about. Because cishet Black people are not the only victims of white supremacy. We all experience it and we all deal with it in different ways, and based on our different identities. And some of us it's in ways more than others. And so it's important to go to bat for all of us, not just some of us. And so how does cishet Black folk use their power to marginalize queer Black folk? Again, it's about talking about proximity to whiteness, proximity to being a woman, and where that places you on a scale of whether or not you deserve to have respect, power, or just basic human rights, you know? And so cishet Black folk who do not have a queer identity. And when I say queer, I do not mean it in the slur. I would like to clarify. Queer has been repurposed, reclaimed by our community, by the LGBT community. It is, and again, these terms are available on the document on our website. You can read more about it, but queer is used as an umbrella term for any LGBT person, LGBT plus person. It is like the most broad term. Oftentimes queer folk will use it if they don't subscribe to any particular label or category that was made up. So they'll just use queer as just like a general broad term to describe who they are. So cishet Black folk may use their power and their proximity to that ideal version of what a person is, who should be respected and have human rights, to further marginalize the people in their own community, their brothers and their siblings. They're, you know, we're all in this together, and we're all fighting the same battle. And so because they are not experiencing that form of oppression, it is important to realize how you know, you as a cishet Black person may be contributing to the marginalization of your queer siblings, you know. And so that can be, Black masculinity can also be perpetuated by religion, and apathetic feelings towards queer people. So, you know, religion, Black homophobia, excuse me, can be perpetuated by religion and apathetic feelings towards queer people. So religion, most religion, it is common for people to know that in like the Christian faith, you know, Leviticus, the way that it handles queer people, and the way that it says that, oh, it's against our religion, against our faith, for queer people to exist, right? Which is not true. That's a whole other session in itself. We're not going to get into that. But the way that it can, that perpetuates the belief in our community. You know, Black folk are very into our faith, that has ties to our freedom, to our liberation, to the abolition of slavery. And so as a part of those adoption of those religious beliefs came the homophobia and the queer phobia that came with it. And again, going back to white supremacist beliefs, the religion that we adopted came from the people who captivated us. So thinking of how much of our belief system, and how much of things that we see as right or wrong, or what does and does not make someone a man, comes from the people who oppressed us, and from those standards that we aspired, is what we aspired to lead to. And Black homophobia is also perpetuated by apathetic feelings towards queer people. That's very, very common in the Black community, where especially now, more modern day, coming from the perspective where people like, I don't really care what you do. I don't really care what someone does in their bedroom, as long as I don't have to see it. You know, that is homophobia. That is homophobia, because it is the discomfort of queer people existing, so much so where you don't want to see it. I just don't want to see it, right? That is still homophobia, just because you are okay with something. If it occupies the same space as you, suddenly it does not become okay. That is still a form of homophobia. And that is very common within our community. Especially, you'll see it like, if, for example, if you're, you know, watching TV with someone, and a commercial that has like a queer couple, it'll be a commercial about insurance, nothing to do with the fact that they're gay. This is about insurance. It just happens to feature, and someone's like, oh, why do they have to always push this stuff in our face? Why does it have to be everywhere? That is homophobia, and that's the way that it continues in our community, because it categorizes, excuse the sirens, there's a motorcade going by, it categorizes queer people in this other group. Like, those aren't real Black people. Like, they're Black, but, you know, they're one of those Black people, when, like I mentioned earlier, we are all in the same struggle against white supremacy and the beliefs that we've assimilated. And so by othering queer Black folk, because of just who they are, that is perpetuating Black homophobia. So moving forward a little bit to homophobia and Black liberation, you know, what we're talking about, white supremacy, we're talking about how conventional ideas of masculinity and sexuality and gender are an extension of white supremacy and these ideas that we've adopted. So, like, what does this look like? What does it mean for our freedom and our liberation? Again, the interconnection of struggle. White supremacy manifests in the way that we perceive gender and sexuality. These are Western conceptions of what we think people should look like, how they should behave. They're all made up. All this is made up. But in going way back to, again, post-Civil War, Reconstruction, Black people are newly freed. They're trying to make their way in this society that they have not been able to be a part of, because they were enslaved, and they were taken from where they're supposed to be. And now they're generations and generations and generations of slaves who are newly freed and they're trying to make their way in this world. How do they do that? By adopting the belief systems of the people who captivated them. And part of that was Western and puritanical, which means like another word for like conservative or more traditional views of gender, sexuality, and masculinity. And those three things work together, and they work together to oppress people in our own communities. And it means how do we get rid of that? It means rejecting white supremacy, all of white supremacy, not just the part that impacts our race and our racial oppression, right? So like I said earlier, white supremacy just doesn't mean by the most literal sense of the word, like the supremacy of white people are better than other people. Obviously that's a part of it, but it's also white cisgendered heterosexual men. That is the supremacy. Unless you are that, you do not get to have power. You do not get to have rights. You cannot be in charge. You will be subordinate to those who are. And when newly, or not even just newly freed Black people, just Black people since we've been freed, have been trying to get at that power, get at that access, get at the equity. But in order to do that, we have to realize we need to define success. We need to define freedom for ourselves and not how it is defined by the people who oppressed us, right? And a part of that definition of freedom by the people who oppressed us, what they define as our freedom, does not include our queer siblings. It doesn't. And so by rejecting white supremacy in all of its forms, you are including all Black people, because you are no better than your oppressors if you decide which one of your community members does and does not deserve freedom, rights to live, saying they'll burn in hell for who they are. Like that's what white folks said about Black people. Black people were dirty, they're gonna go to hell. Like it's no different. And so it's important that as we are looking forward and moving and working towards Black liberation and Black freedom, that is Black freedom of all Black people, all of them, no exceptions. Even when it hurts a little bit, you got it. And James Baldwin, Audre Lorde, other Black writers, Black revolutionaries were keen to this. They were queer. James Baldwin and Audre Lorde were both queer, and that's something you don't learn about. I read James Baldwin and Audre Lorde like in school, like I was aware of them, but the fact that they were queer was nowhere in their history until I got to college. And I was like, why is this the first time I'm hearing about this? And so a part of understanding the interconnection of our struggle is in the fact that queer Black people are still people, still Black people at the end of the day. Their gender and their sexuality has nothing to do with just like their whether or not they deserve rights. Understanding that a lot of the people who we look to, like they like the civil rights movement, were queer. And so kind of unlearning what we've been taught again by these oppressive institutions and working towards the inclusion of all of our Black siblings. So what comes with rejecting white supremacy in all of its forms? Something called disintegration. I'm really glad I found this when I was doing my research. Disintegration is the consequence of rejecting white supremacy. It is the disintegration of society. So our society relies on the subordination of women and queer folk to function. Without it, it's in the structures of these systems, right? So what happens when you reject those things, when you reject the subordination of women and queer people, you become distanced from society. That's where our freedom comes from, because abandoning conventional ideas of what masculinity means, what it means to really just like be someone who deserves respect, leads to disintegration. And like that can sound scary, right? Like, oh, I don't want to. Some people, they don't want to just be completely abandoned and forgotten by society. But looking at the bigger picture, looking and understanding if the society that I've been a part of, that I have been socialized and taught to want to be a part of and included in, the society that's built on white supremacy and the oppression of people like me, is that a society you really want to be a part of? And so disintegration isn't just the being ushered away or the removal or the separation from that society, but it's also the opportunity to build a society that doesn't include that does include all people, that is made for all people to thrive and to exist and to live and to not have to worry about things like that we mentioned in this presentation today, or this discussion today rather. So just food for thought. Disintegration can seem scary. Some of the things I was reading was like wrote it as like as a negative thing. But I think disintegration can be a positive consequence, because it's like the saying, like if you have haters, you're doing something right. If we're disintegrating from a white supremacist and imperialist society that relies on the subordination of women and queer people, maybe we're doing something right. Maybe that's not a society where we want to be, and that where we want to exercise our new freedom of Black people. Okay, that's all I have. I'm going to stop recording. Stop sharing. Now it's time to stop recording. Where did I do that? Uh-oh. Stop recording.